There are lots of little dirty and lazy tricks that we can use to speed up things in our D&D games. I'm a big fan of using static monster damage, for example. If you look at the monster manual, you will see that there are static numbers next to each of the amounts of damage that monsters do, and you can use that static damage instead of rolling for damage. Now, I'm not exactly alone in this, but most people by far still roll for monster damage, and that's absolutely fine. But if we're looking for ways to kind of speed up our game a little bit, little tricks to just cut some of the time out and make things a little bit faster, and focus on the high adventure of our game, that's one of the things that we can look at and speed up. Right now, we're running the Kickstarter for the book Forge of Foes, a book of tips, tricks, and guidance for creating, modifying, and running monsters in your 5e fantasy role-playing games. And in this book, we have lots of little tricks to help speed up things for combat, to help think of how to run combat differently, lots of little things that we can do to try to make the game really focus on the fiction of the game. Now, if you're a tactical dungeon master who doesn't really like all of those smoothing over of all of the edges and really likes to dive into the details, Forge of Foes still supports all of that. We have lots of guidance for how to enrich battles, how to make really interesting dynamic battles with lots of intricate environments to run in, many different monster types, how to think about how those monster types tie together. So this is not just a book of dirty little tricks like the one I'm about to share, but we definitely have a mix of both. You have both things that can make your game far more intricate and detailed and tactically interesting, and also have a bunch of tricks to speed things up when you really want to focus on the high adventure and the fiction of the game more so than the details of the tactics or the details of the mechanics. So we have one chapter in this book called The Lazy Tricks for Running Monsters. And this has a bunch of these little tricks, these little small things that you can drop in to sort of speed things up. And I'm going to share one of those tricks right now, which is using static initiative for monsters. Now in this idea, typically when we're rolling for initiative, DMs do it a bunch of different ways. One way, they will roll initiative for every individual monster and make sure that all those monsters are interspersed with all of the characters in the initiative order. But a lot of times DMs will roll for groups of monsters together. If you have a bunch of kobold warriors, they roll together, and then the kobold sorcerer, that rolls separately, but you still have one initiative roll for all the kobold warriors together. That's typically how it's done. What I'm proposing is that instead of rolling initiative at all, you instead give monsters a static initiative score. Now, if you want to get detailed on this, you can basically make the score 10 plus whatever their dexterity modifier is. So if they're +2 on dexterity, they would have a score of 12. If they have a +4, they would have a 14. If they're like zombies and they have a terrible dexterity, you could give them just a base of 8, right? 10 minus 2 for 8. And then they go in that initiative order. So that way, if you use another trick of mine, which is to have the players track initiative, you have one of the players who's in charge of tracking initiative, then when initiative is rolled, you just tell them, my monsters have a initiative of 12. And you don't even have to bother to roll. I have an even dirtier trick with this, which is generally just default to 12. While you're getting all your notes together, while you're figuring out what your monsters are doing, while you're getting the miniatures out, or while you're doing anything else, just say that they have an initiative score of 12. This is going to average up a little bit higher than some monsters actually have. Most monsters don't exactly have a dexterity bonus of +2, but I find that monsters are typically at a disadvantage in the action economy and in the initiative economy anyway, so giving them this tiny little bit of a boost isn't so bad. Of course, when you have monsters that are particularly slow, you probably don't want to give them a 12. You might give them something like an 8. But for a typical monster, I think a static initiative bonus of 12 works really well. You know it, it's right off the top of your head, and anytime the monsters are going, they have an initiative of 12. Now, there are a couple advantages to running static initiative like this. One is obviously speed. Even before you know what monsters might even be in the order or what any of their stats are, you already know that they have an initiative score of 12. So you just say it. My guys have an initiative of 12. Even if you're tracking initiative, you just know they already go on a 12. You drop them in a 12, then you see where all the characters go. Some of the characters go ahead of it, some of the characters go behind it, and you're all set. So obviously speed is one of the main advantages of having a static initiative score. You already know what it is, you drop it in, and you're ready to go. But there's actually another advantage to this, which is that the monsters are always going to typically go in the middle of the initiative order. So the characters are really interested, the players are really interested on, did we beat the monster or did we not beat the monster? And that gives it almost like a static DC, that they're actually rolling a static DC to see when they are going to go in the initiative order. Are they going to go ahead of the monsters or are they going to go behind the monsters? What I have found is that the characters don't really mind going up against a static initiative score like this because they want to know whether or not they beat it. And they know they don't have to beat a 20. They know that you didn't roll really high and the monsters are really high in the initiative order. So therefore you have to, it doesn't really matter. You got to beat a 20 in order to succeed. And they might be a little miffed that like, well, that means the monster never rolls a 4. So it means that, we never have a chance for all of us to go. But generally speaking, the players are thinking about their particular character, and they're mostly interested, did we beat them or not? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But what it means in the flow of the game is that the monsters are always typically going in the middle. You usually have some characters that go ahead of them, you have some characters that go behind, but typically the monsters are going in the middle, which gives them this slight edge that they're not all going to get ganged up on by the characters. The characters aren't going to get total tactical superiority in the environment before the monsters even get to act. You get this situation where the monsters are probably going to act somewhere in the middle. And I find that to actually work really well for combat. It makes combat a little bit more dynamic. It means that things aren't quite so certain, and you don't get these circumstances where the characters completely wipe the characters out. Now, likewise, you don't run into circumstances where the monsters all beat the hell out of the characters right before the characters get to go. Usually a couple of the characters get to go ahead of time. Now, of course, the dice can be very swingy. And when you have 5 or 6 players that are rolling, they could all roll really high and all go before the monsters, and that's cool. And sometimes they could all roll really low and go after the monsters, and that's cool too. Those are going to be pretty extreme circumstances, though. It takes a lot of work for 5 or 6 characters to all roll below like a 12. It can happen, certainly, but it doesn't happen that often, so you're not going to run into that situation too much. Generally, what it means is that your battle is going to feel a little bit more consistent because your monsters are typically going in the middle, and that's another advantage to having a static initiative score like this. Now, if you're the kind of DM who really wants to get into the nitty-gritty of the tactics of combat and you don't like this idea at all, that's cool. First of all, you don't have to use it. I'm not saying everybody should be using this all the time. If this is a tool that you find to be useful, you should hang on to it. But even if you are one of the more tactical focused DMs who likes to run big set piece battles with lots of different monsters and wants to make sure those monsters are interspersed in the initiative order and they're not all just dropping on a 12, then certainly this might not work for you in that circumstance. But I would say that even if you typically would roll for initiative for monsters like you would normally, there are times where using this tool might be useful. If you're running a battle where the outcome isn't that important, if it's a smaller battle, if it's an easier battle, if it's a battle against only one monster, or if it's a battle against just one group of monsters and there's fewer of them than the characters, you can keep this idea on hand and use it when speed is important. Instead of bothering to have to roll for initiative for all of the monsters when you're running a smaller battle, you can just use this as a quick rule of thumb. You can just drop this in, use it, use the static initiative, and you're ready to go. So even if you're a more mechanics-focused DM who really likes the integrated tactics of monsters and character combat, you can still keep this on hand and use it on occasion when you think it makes sense for you. But if you're like me, you might find out that you really like the idea of a static initiative score so much that you use it pretty much all the time. I think that I've been using the static initiative score now for a couple of years, and I don't think I've had anybody even mention that we're doing it. It just works really well. It's very fast, it's very easy, and it speeds up the game. If you want to find more tricks like this, please check out the Forge of Foes Kickstarter that's going on right now. There's a link down in the show notes below. We have all kinds of tips and tricks for running monsters, for running combat. Again, both with a focus on making the tactical combat very, very interesting, but also tricks to speed things up when you want to speed things up. Wide variety of advice that we're offering in this book. And you can find a 30-page preview to check out all of the different kinds of things that we're offering in this book on that Kickstarter page. Again, the show notes are below. If you like tips and tricks like this and want to have them sent to your email inbox every week for free, you can join the Sly Flourish newsletter. You can also check out all of the other work that I'm doing on the Sly Flourish Patreon. Sign up to become a patron and you get access to all kinds of exclusive adventures, exclusive guides, a dedicated Discord server, all different things that you get for being a member of the Sly Flourish Patreon. And you can pick up my other books over at the Sly Flourish bookstore. All the links for that are in the show notes below. Thank you all very much. Have a great day and get out there and play an RPG.